Before we hop into this episode, I have one favor to ask of you. If you've got any kind of information or inspiration from this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you hit the subscribe button. Just like most podcasts out there are more people that watch this show that are not subscribed than that are subscribed. And so if you want to help me get bigger and better guests for this show as we go along, and I hope you do stick along, it would mean the world to me to hit that subscribe button so that we can make it happen. Thank you. Let's get into the interview. Annie Särnblad, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I'm so excited to jump into your book, your courses, all of the information that you're putting into the world. It's profound. It's so important. And I'd love to dive into what got you into microexpressions to begin with. I know that your childhood was a little bit difficult and you got
Yeah.
gaslit and everything in
Yep.
between, but what was the precursor to you jumping in and wanting to teach this into the world?
So interestingly enough, I was obsessed with figuring out who I could trust. So everybody talks about me as a lie detector, and it's not wrong. But my really big focus has always been who among the people in the world that are around me am I entirely safe with? Who can I completely remove my filter with and just interact with on a really authentic level? Because I was really blessed to have some of those people in my life for most of my life. And they weren't necessarily the people that you would expect. So they weren't family members, but they were people that acted as if they were family members. So I was obsessed with the nonverbal because I always felt like the nonverbal was a truer reflection of who somebody is and what they actually think and feel. And so I got into that, and then I never had any intention of teaching it other than to my own children. And so much of my work, I was working as a strategic advisor and coaching managing directors and CEOs. I actually got into that really young because I was working at a consultancy, a management consultant firm in Stockholm. And I was the only person in the firm that had English as their mother tongue. So I was allowed to do a lot of things as these Swedish companies were merging with different other companies and becoming sort of bigger international companies out, in Europe, or even in Scandinavia. So they started going over to having English as the official language. So I was able to, I don't want to say bullshit, but kind of bullshit my way forward just by offering to do all the deliverables and all the presentations in English.
Wow.
And so I got into that. And the teaching only came by necessity when I moved back to the US, and I couldn't, after 25 years abroad, and I couldn't find work. And so I thought, well, I might as well teach microexpressions because people seemed obsessed with that.
Were they obsessed with it as soon as you started?
So they were not, because there were only 4 grownups in the world that knew that I could code and that I could teach. And so it was something that my children knew, and there were very, very few other humans that knew that I could do it. And I ended up taking the entire field and simplifying it so that I could teach my children. And so I was able to teach on a level that nobody else did, but it felt safer to me. And because all of my professional work was focused on confidentiality. I mean, I was walking around with these massive secrets, and sometimes they were business deal secrets, and sometimes they were just simply that somebody was deeply struggling in their relationships, whether those be professional or private. And so it always felt safer to me. And I think that was one of the things that I learned as a child, to kind of disappear, to kind of become gray, as they call it, and to fade into the background. And that way I was able to see things that I was able to bring it up. So all my clients knew from working with me at every single job I got, but from the time I was in my 30s, was through referrals. And they knew that I could read people like nobody's business, but nobody knew why. And so I got to the US and I couldn't get hired because, I left when I was 16. So my quote unquote network of high school friends, everyone's like, yeah, but you're 16, even though I was 40. And so I started talking about microexpressions, and I worked with the Museum of Science in Boston. And that was sort of one of the big breaks I got in that profession. And they were obsessed with learning what I could do, why I could do it, and how they could use it.
There's so many pathways I want to go down. I want to start with, like I said, childhood is so important and carves us into the person that we are and gives us a reason for getting down a path, right? So hypervigilance is something that, the way that I've heard you explain it, isn't something that you learn, but it's something that you haven't unlearned, right? And that's something that I think is like the core of this podcast really is like unlearning, because we go through life
Yeah.
with so many beliefs and mindsets and
Hmm.
perspectives that we never realize that we haven't let go of, but isn't the truth, but it's our truth because that's all we've known. We haven't been able to
Yes.
unlearn.
Yeah.
Is there anything when it comes to hypervigilance? Because I think there's part of it where so many people, especially in the world today with phones and everything else, like hypervigilance is a good thing when we're trying to be protected and safe, but it's
Hmm.
also not the best thing because we live with this ambient anxiety for most of our lives. So is there a part of hypervigilance that we should let go of or unlearn?
Well, absolutely. So that the gift that has come with the micro expressions is that, I was talking to talking to this potential client the other day, and he was driving me home in his car, and from a work event or home, but he was driving to me to where I was staying. And he said, okay, so you can see when somebody's lying. And I said, yes, I absolutely can. And he goes, so you must trust me. And my
Right.
thought was like, dude, you just outed yourself. And there was this moment, and he's staring at me, and he's like, keep, and I go, no, that's not true. I absolutely have people that I so fully trust. And then you could see the moment where he realized, like, other people may be trustworthy, but I just told her I'm not.
Hmm.
And there was this piece of, I said, I keep my circle small, but there are absolutely people that I can completely let down my mask. I can say whatever pops into my brain. I mean, it's such a gift to let go of that hypervigilance and be able to be with someone where you can say, I said something really stupid because it was unfiltered. But some of us need to talk to think. And
Yeah.
so, this ability to say something even stupid means that not only do I hear how that sounds, but I'm in a conversation now with someone who will say, okay, let's look at that. Did you really mean that? Or why do you think that? And we've become so careful in society that we're either sort of with or against everybody. And we're so aligned to our political views and to whatever affiliations we have that we've lost the ability to be curious and to listen. And one of the things really of living in 9 different countries has taught me that people have their perspectives really based on their experiences. And I'm so interested in people that are resilient and willing to listen and curious and can question. It's one of the reasons I when I checked you out, I was like, yeah, I absolutely want to do this podcast. This is going to be an interesting conversation. So yes, to circle back to that hypervigilance. Oh God, I hope for everybody that they have moments in their lives and certainly relationships where we can completely let go of the hypervigilance, because we become a society that is so focused. I believe Eddie Murphy said something. He did that Comedians in Cars with Seinfeld. And he
Yes.
said something about our culture being this culture of outrage. We're so eager to jump to being outraged, and it's ruined some of our humor and some of the comedy. And I
Yeah.
think it's also ruined our ability to learn from each other.
Yeah, I believe in that. I think we,
Yeah.
we we live in too many absolutes in life. Life is black and
Hmm.
white. It's all or nothing.
Yeah.
And that's just not how the world is. There's so many
No.
nuances to things. And in
Yes.
micro expressions, there's so many nuances to things. And that's
Right.
something that I think is really important too. Like pupils can be seen as, so many different things, like looking at someone's pupil, seeing them dilate. And like, so when it comes to micro expressions, when you were
Mhm.
teaching your kids early on, not thinking that I'm going to teach this into the world, what
Yeah.
were some of the first few things that you taught them to look out for?
So the first thing I did was babies when they're little, we do this. We tend to do it almost innately. We learn very quickly. If I stick out my tongue, my baby will stick out their tongue. You can get them to
Mirror.
mirror. We humans
Right.
are wired to mirror each other, and we mirror each other's expressions, whether or not we're aware of it. And
Mhm.
so, what I did in the same way when you're introducing, I mean, I remember my mother in law in Sweden. She passed away recently, but she used to tell me, when I was young, I'd never seen or heard a banana or an orange. And I had such a hard time imagining, but those are tropical fruits. Of course, northern Sweden, she lived out in the countryside. She hadn't seen those fruits. So I think about it in those terms that we teach babies the words for the objects that are around them. And so
Mhm.
because I lived in this headspace of the nonverbal and was able to code on a very high level micro expressions, numerically code them, and I'm certified in that coding system, which is called facial action coding system. I put words to it. So I would do this to my babies and I would go, oh, that's disgust. That means icky, yucky. And even before they were verbal, I would say, it's got this piece, can you see the shadows here, this deep line and the wrinkles here, and my upper lip comes up. And so that is what I now call the no face. And that's the full piece of the puzzle. It actually shuts off our nasal passages. And when in a business meeting or even in a dating situation, if you ask somebody to do something, you talk about something and they're showing dislike, it's just that little twitch. And so I would do both the macro and the micro and say, this means ick. I don't like it. Ew, I don't want to eat that. And so my kids never had a disconnect between that piece of instinct that humans are naturally wired to read those expressions. That's what we base learning language on. It's our nonverbal. So all humans build the language on that if you are a sighted individual. And they never lost that ability. They immediately got words for things. So there was never a disconnect between their subconscious brain and their conscious brain.
And when you learned languages, it was all through immersion. So
Yes.
you really were able to teach your kids from a period of, not only did you learn like your experience through microexpressions, but actual your experience in life and going around and being around a bunch of different examples.
Right.
How did travel help you in learning microexpressions? And I can imagine, like, there's so much I want to learn about travel that I'd love to learn from you.
Right. Well, it's just, it throws you into something and you have all these preconceived ideas about, how this piece of life works. And I know how relationships work and I know how people work. And the longer you live, if you have a curious brain, the more humbled you are, going like, oh, I completely misinterpreted that. So I spent literally years of my life not understanding what people were saying. And so I got very, very good at reading the facial expressions. And when I did the coding, I was able to do the coding, which is, it's a very structured pattern recognition. So in my brain, it's very mathematical. And despite my not having a mathematical brain for numbers, I seem to want to put behavioral issues into patterns all the time. So I can say, okay, this person is behaving in this pattern. They're likely to behave in this pattern in another situation. So for me, it was all about predicting both danger and trustworthiness. And so that watching, if you are watching a soap opera without sound, dollars to donuts, because it's so animated with the nonverbal, you'll understand, oh, that guy is cheating on her and she's actually cheating on him behind that. You can see through the body language when it's magnified. And what I was able to do is to start coding the minute changes and then to focus on the obsession with me and my 3 children as they grew. So my kids are 22, 20, and 18. And the obsession for us became to find the one piece of each expression that's only unique to that expression. So I don't have to teach you the full facial expression. I can just teach you the bad bunny rabbit twitch, that's the no face. That's, do you want to go out and grab some pizza? It doesn't mean that she doesn't like you, but it may mean that she's had pizza twice today. It's just a no. And it gives you information that everybody else misses, which is interesting. And it creates the ability to be intimate with someone should you want it. And, not necessarily physically intimate, but it allows me to understand my extremely powerful clients quickly and to be able to play with people. So I can see instantly, like if I say something that upsets you, I then can pull back. And if I say something that delights you, like if my dirty humor or my outrageousness or my willing to call out things delights you, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to do more of that. This is fun. So I'm willing to play in almost all of my both personal and business interactions. And what has happened with my children is that as they've grown up, they get bored if they don't see any microexpressions. So they poke a lot. And they also, I have this, my son is 18 years old and he's incredible at making sure that people are included. Even though he's got more of a mathematical, logical brain, you'll see that pucker if somebody says, hey, you guys want to do this? And somebody goes, he'll say, hey, you should join us. That's a pucker of vulnerability. That's taking that grape and turning it into a raisin. So even if it's almost peripheral, because he knows that vulnerability happens here on the chin, he sees a little jump on the chin and he'll include them. And for years, nobody understood that he could do that. He kept it quiet. My girls talked about it, but nobody knew that he did that until I did it. I taught one of the AP Psych classes as a guest lecturer at his high school, and you could see all these girls go, "Oh, that makes sense." And he's like, "You outed my secret."
It's such when I found out about your work in general, I thought this is the kind of stuff that I would have hoped I got taught in school, right? Like
Yes,
there's so many things that we learn in school. I don't think there's one thing I remember from school that I use in
I
everyday
know.
life. And
I know.
so I use the podcast as a way to like learn from the people that I want to
Yes.
learn from.
Yeah.
And this is my actual school, because I don't like the schooling system, but I love education. I love
Hmm.
learning. And Chris Voss, the FBI negotiator that I think we spoke about a little bit,
Yeah.
from him coming on the show, when he's in the airport, when he's in conversations in everyday life, like he uses negotiation in a way, in just subtle ways, to make him
Yep.
get better at the skill and also
Hmm.
just have fun a little bit. So in everyday life for you, I can imagine, whether it's you're working with a CEO, you're working with a child, whoever it
Hmm.
may be, you're able to use it in everyday life. How do you use it in everyday life? And does it ever
Okay.
consume you too much? I know that's
Oh,
two questions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll just tell you quickly, after COVID, I started flying again, and I had to take off my glasses, my distance glasses, because there was
Yeah.
so much distress and trauma on everybody's faces at the airport that I couldn't manage. Like my nervous system couldn't handle. You can't walk up to strangers and be like, "You need a hug." Also, you need a hug. Also, I think you're going to hit somebody if you don't get a hug.
Right.
So there's this piece of it was just too much stress of humanity coming at me at the same time. But before we go deeper into that, Chris Voss,
Yes.
I watched that interview. It was a great interview. So if you
Thank
haven't,
you.
if anybody's watching hasn't seen that, it's delightful.
Thank
He
you.
talks about people thinking he's angry all the time
Yes.
because he's
Yeah.
sitting there with his furrowed brow. And I
Mhm.
so was like talking to my screen going, no, if he's angry, his lips are going to be tight because
Yeah.
this is anger.
Mhm.
And so, but Darwin talked about these as our concentrating muscles. And so when we actually do Botox, we impede the thought process, the deep concentration, and the ruminating.
Wow.
Yeah. So it freezes our ability to think on a deep level. And so we actually need to move the brow to both problem solve, and problem solving is a piece of anger because there's something that's not good in the world. There's something not right that needs to be fixed or solved, but anger is always going to involve that clench of everything. It's one of the reasons that anger is so toxic for us because it clenches all of us
Mhm.
and restricts our blood flow.
Yeah, we're really
So yeah,
tight.
if you just see this, that could be just I'm thinking about work. If your mouth and lips are soft, thinking about work, but no, I'm mad.
So when you're in an airport and after, because I could imagine, like you said, after COVID, you have to take I wear contacts, so I
Yeah,
could imagine you're taking your glasses off. You're like, I can't look at anyone because I want to
right.
help everyone in such a way.
Yes, yes. Where
What
I
are
want to
what are
run.
yeah? Oh my God, yeah. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that you look out for to kind of strengthen that muscle of remembering micro expressions? Because I'm like you said, you can get consumed by it really easily, but
Oh, so it's not. It's if you go to meditate for a week and you do a
Mhm.
silence, or if you did a retreat, I mean, you might feel funny speaking afterwards, but you won't forget your English.
Yeah.
So it is so buried deep to the point that I wake up in the middle of the night freezing my face in an expression to say, especially after night terrors, after dreams, bad dreams. So I'll be like, okay, I'm problem solving, I'm angry, and my chin is puckered and I'm scared and vulnerable. So I will that's how I really got the depth of the deeper mixed expressions because humans
Mhm.
often feel multiple feelings at the same time. And it's why when I teach, again, my obsession has been I don't have to teach you every piece of sadness or vulnerability or anger for you to understand. Like if the mouth is tight, that's angry. It's
Mhm.
angry is not there's no other emotion that's going to give you tight lips. Now you can be angry and vulnerable, which is hurt, right?
Yeah.
But if there's tight lips, it's automatically angry. And so the kids and I are the only people, as far as I know, in the world that have been able to simplify it to that level. And when you simplify it, it then becomes a usable thing. And as you use it, you strengthen those muscles. So it doesn't turn off for me or my children. It would be like turning off. So I have a narrator in my brain. I know not everybody thinks in words, but man, I wish I could tell her to just shut up.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's like a mic, my face is a narrator too. So I have those dual narrations is the brain that's talking to me in words and the facial expressions that are talking to me in feelings. And I can't ever not know it. And I think that's also one of the reasons that most of the people in my field, there's a majority men. I think a huge number of people that are as mathematical as they need to be able to absorb, learn, and code. A huge percent, I believe, are on the spectrum, which makes them phenomenal at pattern recognition. I mean, my best students have been the ones that have been on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And then, but because I'm in theory neurotypical, even though I've got a very unusual brain, I think I would fall under that category, or somebody would need to put in another category for me. I know on a deep level always what my feelings are. There's never any disconnect where I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling. So I know the emotion and I know the movement, and I put them together, and then I translate it and simplify, because my entire life in doing all of these languages has been to, how can I simplify it so it becomes clear? How can I simplify and translate? And so that's what the kids and I have done with the teaching.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad.
I know they wish they could turn it off.
Yeah, especially learning it so young, like it's just like a part of who I am now.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an amazing skill though. Your daughter, they've had experiences where it's absolutely necessary for them to have it, and it's got them
Survival.
out of,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. It's got them out of,
Mm-hmm.
of bad situations. And I'm glad that
Yep.
you bring up that autistic kids, I guess specifically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Autistic
Yeah.
kids are your best clients, and you work with
Yes.
like some of the best CEOs in the world too.
Yep.
Outside of pattern recognition, what makes them so amazing or at being able to capture micro expressions?
Well, so there's two pieces. And so when I work with, and I don't take on the only individual clients I take on. I mean, I do corporate trainings, and
Yeah.
I still do coaching at a very, very high level, because that stimulates I just love working with people that are beyond intelligent, that are just have really, really complicated problems, thousands of employees and just this really complex lives, and I can talk to them about things that they don't talk. I mean, that's kind of my high, and I think
Hmm.
that comes from the childhood trauma of being able to control people's moods. That obsession with being able to be the confidant of somebody who is, many, many times over a billionaire, or many,
Hmm.
many, like, has these really, really complex issues that they don't talk about. I mean, that's fascinating for me. I love secrets.
Yeah.
And I love the vulnerability of, I can't tell anybody this, but I need to run something by you. I love those late night calls. Sorry, what was the question?
No, you're good. I just want to say, as you're saying that, have you ever watched the show Suits by chance?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can't, or maybe it's not Suits. No, Billions. You ever watch the show Billions? That's actually the
Yes.
show. I
Yes.
can't think of her name, but you remind me of
Yep. Yep.
exactly who you're thinking
Yep.
of.
I had a client recently that said, "This is what you do." And I was like, "Shh,
Yes.
be quiet. Don't tell anybody."
Yeah.
Yes. I can't remember what her name is. And it was a long
No.
time ago I
Yeah.
watched it. And there are pieces of that show that I started my career in investment banking, and I hated it. It was a terrible fit for me. But so there are pieces of a show that kind of ignite my trauma, but I kept watching it just because of her, because she was so interesting. And she was,
Yes.
what I guess that the way, part of the way they framed it, at least part of it, was that she's a performance coach. So
Hmm.
I was talking to a very good friend of mine who I do a bunch of work with, and the other day, and I said, I know what I do finally for these, for your clients, and for these really complicated, most of them are men. And he goes, okay,
Right.
how are you phrasing it? And I said, I help people get out of their own way,
Hmm.
because we all have these things where if they could just, I had one client who goes into every meeting. He's one of the smartest humans you'll ever meet, and he goes into every meeting like it's a battlefield. And I just said, you pull back, relax, lead. You're such a natural authority. You're such a natural leader. You don't need to fight anymore. Let go of that. I know that comes from trauma, but it's no longer useful for you. So, just as you and I are talking about this piece of unlearning,
Yeah.
unlearn that. Like, go
Yeah.
forth and conquer, but not in an aggressive way. Because if you calm down and you speak low in your throat, everyone will follow you, because what he was saying was always the best thing for the organization. So he needed to slow down, let them intellectually catch up with him in the moment. And then everybody calmed down. And he said, well, that changes everything. So it's
Yeah.
those pieces that I find so fascinating. And of course, when people tell you the truth, and a lot of, I think the reason they tell me the truth is they're like, well, you can see it anyway.
Yeah. Right.
So there's a piece of surrender, and they're like, well, you're going to know what I'm feeling anyway. I might as well just tell you, because I might as well use you as this resource and tell you the whole ugly truth, because you can see that I'm they'll say things like, you can see that I'm struggling with self-hatred. It's a terrible thing, but it's a beautiful thing to get to that point in your life where you're like, I'm going to tell you my inner thoughts, and then we can work on them because I trust you not to judge me.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping somebody get through some of these pieces that are holding them back. And it's very rare for me to have a long-term client that get to the point where they ask me, hey, I have some personal things going on. Can I run this by you? My wife is incredibly frustrated with certain behaviors, and I will talk them through it. And they'll go, okay, well, she seems so much happier now. Well, go figure. Go figure, you just needed to listen, or you needed to carve out time for her, or you needed to, and just ask her, like, what's important to you, and then actually listen. Now you need to shut up and listen. So I tell I boss them around a lot. So you're not wrong.
Yeah.
You're
I
not
mean,
wrong.
it's needed though, right? Because a lot of those specific, like those kind of people, I don't know if it's pride. I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
a safety mechanism where they feel
Mm-hmm.
they need to do things alone, and if they ask for help outside or are vulnerable, they're not as strong. They're not as powerful. Like even having empathy is a way of like letting your guard down in a way, and
Oh
it's a
yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and some of them can't be vulnerable in their deepest, most important relationships. And
Yeah.
if you just tell them, like, I mean, one of the phrases I use all the time is, well, that's dumb. Did you just say I was dumb? No, I said that this behavior, this
Yeah.
tactic is clearly not working out for you. Should we talk about what might work?
Hmm.
And I mean, when you're a really powerful person, nobody says no to you.
Yeah.
And it's dramatic, and also nobody parents you. And I think I live by the idea that we all need to be parented sometimes. We don't grow out of it. And so every once in a while, we need to, if we're behaving badly or in some way that's destructive, either towards ourselves or others, it's having somebody put up that boundary and say, okay, like, I understand where you're coming from, but also this is not a successful tactic, or just straight up, that's mean.
Hmm.
And one of the things I also say is, like, it's just not that hard to be kind. It's not that hard to work together. I get that competition and this drive to competition has led you to where you are, to like running this multi-billion-dollar company, but it's also not serving you. You can collaborate. It won't hurt. It will actually be good for you. And I think sometimes people in power forget that loyalty is such an important thing, and that loyalty really only comes from kindness and seeing other people's needs and wants and listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You went on Lisa Bilyeu's show
Mm-hmm.
a while ago, and
Yeah.
her husband said a quote once that stuck with me a few years ago. It stuck with me to this day. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's that all that matters is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And from a billionaire himself, it's
Mm-hmm.
a amazing thing to hear, because a lot of those people don't feel good about themselves, and so if they
Oh,
don't feel
none
good
of
about
them,
themselves,
almost none of them do. I had a
right?
conversation with a client who is, just a very well known public figure. He saw me speak and he just said, I know you said you don't work with individuals. I'm not taking no for an answer. And I laughed at him. I was like, all right, well, what's your pitch? Go ahead. And he gave me his pitch. But anyway, I want to say it was maybe the sixth or seventh time we met. I said, okay, so what's the trauma? And he goes, what do you mean? And I go, well, this drive comes from somewhere. It's just not a thing that a person who has had an easy life
Yeah.
has. And he's like, oh, he tried to get out of it. And he finally just admitted what it was. And I said, okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about that if you want to keep talking about it. But I needed to kind of to where the drive was coming from, because it was getting in his way of finding peace. I mean, he was phenomenal at the business part, but people mess up their relationships and then they don't recover from that. And it doesn't matter how much money you've got or how many sticks of gold you got in the bank.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And I think it's really important to like really address that, right? And because
Mhm.
no matter what you accomplish, like at the end of the day, if you don't feel good with yourself, then more is never going to fulfill the void that you're running from. And most of those successful people, it seems as though they're not running towards something, they're running away from something.
Mhm.
And when you
Almost
start working
always.
with someone, uh, how, especially at that kind of level, whether
Mhm.
they're a billionaire, they're just running a massive company,
Mhm.
they're under a lot of stress. And
Yeah.
obviously, as you being able to identify their micro expressions, they're going to eventually tell you the truth anyway. But what are some of those questions that you ask people to kind of open them up and to get out those micro expressions to see
Oh,
what
I
they're really
mean,
feeling?
so first of all, it's almost all of my, I might not want to say like every high powered client I've ever had has been
Yeah.
recommended, either recommended by another high powered client or they've seen me perform. They've seen me talk about micro expressions at some big conference and they pulled me aside and they've seen me do it live where I've like said, okay, now you're there. They go, okay, well do me. And I go, well, now you're showing fear because, and then now you just swallowed and you show vulnerability and puckering your chin because now you feel even more vulnerable. And now you're wrinkling your nose because that's disgust. And that's like, oh shit. And now your foot is turning away so that you're like aiming for the exit. And I was like, do you want me to
Mhm.
stop? No, I kind of like it. And your
Right.
infraorbital triangles, your cheeks are popping up because you're showing pleasure. So I see your smile bags right here. And then you're
Mhm.
wrinkling again because it's like delightful and also uncomfortable. So this is the delight, this is the discomfort. And they go, it's like you're inside my soul. And I say, yeah, it's what I do. And if you want to sit down and talk, we can sit down and talk. We can find a place where it's because often I'll do this as kind of a way to show off and
Yeah.
perform in front of a group. I mean, there was a situation where somebody said, Annie, show this guy what you can do. And I was at this event, and the guy was a really high powered, I can't name him, but like, and he is not somebody I would work with, but he was from one of these investment banks that's very, very well known. And he
Mhm.
had recently retired, and he's just showing like this deep disgust.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, well, I worked at blah, 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 blah. And I said, honey, that's so hard. That really messes with your brain, doesn't it? It like really, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And he just went, and I was like, okay. And now he's deepening his disgust. Now he did it. And the guys were in stitches. And I said, I'll stop. It's so I like to play, and I'm not usually mean, but in that instance, I was bordering on mean because this guy just, it was just etched into him. And even when his face was relaxed, it was deep, 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 this sense of disapproval and judgment and just anger towards the world. And at the same time, just this, I'm better than everybody. And I was like, I'm just going to take you down one peg, see what happens. But so usually when they bring me in, once they've hired me or once we're having a conversation, once we really get into it, I will say, things like, what is the one thing, if you could change or you could fix, what one problem would you solve that's taking up way too much of your time? And often that's a people or a person problem.
Yeah.
And they say, well, this person on my board is like the thorn in my side. Okay, well, let's discuss why. It's often at that level, it's a question of managing really, really big egos. And if you can kind of get people to calm down, it's extraordinarily helpful. I mean, and some of the clients that my clients work with are really unhappy, gruff men that just need a little bit of kindness. And if you can show a little bit of kindness, you can get them to kind of lower their guard and listen. And when people are in defense mode, they can't. They just can't manage to listen.
Yeah. It
So
seems like
it's, yeah.
no, go ahead.
Oh, it's most business problems are people problems, at least at some level. So if I can talk you through it and give you some things to try, then it's like, sometimes they have like a VP or somebody on their board or business partner that is just taking a disproportionate amount of energy. And sometimes I do a lot of work with family offices. Have you watched Succession?
I no, but
No.
that was the other one other than Billions that I was told to
Yeah.
watch. I need to.
Yes. So a lot of my clients kept bringing that up. And so I eventually watched it, and they're pieces of my own family that we recognize. And, I have one kid that the ones that's exactly your age, she's like, I can't watch this. They're mean. And also they remind me a little bit of my family. And I was
Right.
like, yeah,
Right.
same. But it's really hard if you have, if your identity is built on your professional identity and you have maybe succeeded less in your personal life, And I work with, I lived in Asia for 12 years. And so almost all my business, I grew up where family office was the norm. And almost all businesses were in some shape or form family offices. And so you see the head, the patriarch, retiring and moving down. And there was one situation where I had a client who I was working with, and his father was involved in a negative way in this company and just driving him nuts and absorbing all of his energy. And it was as simple as carving out some time on Sundays where they were having a debriefing meeting every Sunday. And then his father would leave him alone during the week. And it's not that dissimilar from a child being really, really needy for parental attention. And, you have some parents, it could be either the mother or the father that's always traveling. And so you carve out some time, maybe on a Saturday or Sunday, and that's our special time, which, isn't perfect because people like that everyday time. But this completely stopped the sort of neediness. And the other thing that was going on was his father was never touched. And so he was like grabbing at him all the time. And I was like, well, do you ever give him just a hug? And so this was, it was because what was happening was the patriarch was replaced. And now he was the powerful person. And the past patriarch was acting like a child. And he couldn't adjust to the fact that his father was now in a position where he was the needy child. And so he had to work on reframing that and then figure out some tactics. So again, people problems.
It is people problems. And you've worked with so many different kinds of
Mhm.
people, whether it's language, age, position that they're in. You lived abroad for 25 years, I believe.
Mhm. Yes.
What have you learned about human behavior when it comes to living abroad, from working with children to working with some of the top CEOs in the world? Like, what have
Yeah.
you learned about human behavior?
That there are good people and bad people everywhere, that we cannot live in a culture or an organization or any kind of tribe without absorbing some of the patterns and beliefs of that tribe, organization, culture, whatnot. We are, behavior and attitude and mood is contagious. So if you're in a toxic environment anywhere, you're eventually going to start feeling smaller and lose belief in yourself and lose self-confidence. I think that for myself, I went through a period of it was almost every country that I lived in, people would say to me after a certain period of time, often as I, really absorbed and could communicate in the language, oh, but you're not American, you're one of us. You're Swedish or you're Swiss or, you're local or you're Tika, like you're from Costa.
Yeah.
We're not a foreigner. And I finally realized that this was my chameleoning. It wasn't a healthy thing necessarily to completely adjust to the culture and almost obliterate my actual self. So there's a piece of me as a grown up, having moved back to the US, that finds such enormous relief in being home and feeling like I'm me and that I have my full voice. And I've learned from each culture, each family that I lived with, because I did a lot of exchange student stuff. But it's made me question all the things, but ultimately settle into this idea that humans are humans and that there's kindness and actually evil everywhere. And that we just do better when we surround ourselves with people who want us to succeed, and not necessarily in monetary ways, but that are happy for our growth and happy for the good things that happen to us, that don't only show up when we come with bad news. There are a lot of people that will be really good friends when you're suffering, or vice versa, when you're cheerful. And what you want is somebody that can love you through different pieces of your life and encourage you. I think the thing that I do best in my life is that I can see people's potential. So both when it comes to parenting, when it comes to friends, when it comes to clients. The only place that hasn't served me well is romantic relationships, because I think I would have done better if I hadn't just seen potential and just seen like more what's in front of me, because I'm so good at being like, but you could be more.
Yeah, when you said earlier that you help people get out of their own way,
Mhm.
I got into personal coaching really young, and it didn't really make much sense to me, but I knew that I didn't want to go down the path
Mhm.
of college and more learning. I want to just get into action. That's the way
Yeah.
I've identified, because when everyone asks me what I do, it's hard to explain what I do, but that's the
Uh-huh.
shortest approach of how I can do that. So you've heard the quote, you are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself most with, right? Well, that's more true than you could possibly imagine. And what if those 5 people were a human lie detector, an FBI negotiator, an ex-CIA spy, a billionaire, and everything in between? Well, that's exactly what I've been able to do with my podcast over these past few years. From starting in my car with no money, no experience, no following, not even a microphone, and now I'm collaborating with some of the most profound individuals in the world. And it's because of 2 simple things: crafting the perfect pitch so that when the person sees the message, they are open to actually entertaining the opportunity of speaking with you. And number 2, finding a way to get that pitch seen to begin with so that you actually can get in that room. And if you want to learn the skills and how I've been able to get the guests that I've been able to get in my show without any kind of audience or experience, the link in the description will be there for Get Your Guest, my course, and how I've been able to collaborate and connect with some profound individuals and show you how you can too.
I just had this conversation yesterday with somebody where I'd be saying, if you're trying to figure out how to sell yourself and at your age, but I have a lot of clients, so I can't talk too much about my work, but I have a couple of clients that are younger.
Mhm.
And often they're like family members of somebody, or there's some relationship that has pulled me into. And I talk about finding like 1 or 2 things that you're really good at
Mhm.
that people can repeat. So when people say, oh, I met James, he's amazing at this, he's amazing at this. And so the guy I was talking to the other day, it was like that he's good at numbers and he's good at people. And that's such a rare combination. But just
Mhm.
that you have to do the thinking for other people when you're marketing, so that when a position or an idea or an opportunity for you, your work is going to be more like mine, where it's probably project based because
Yeah.
you can't help it. It's just a hardwire. You're hardwired as an entrepreneur. So that's one of the things that I would say to people so they get it quickly, is that I'm simply hardwired to be a doer and to be an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And I cannot sit still and learn passively. I have to learn actively. And I want to participate both in my own learning and in challenging other people to learn. So I love that piece from what you're doing. It's one of the reasons that I was really excited about doing this.
Well, I thank you again, and I remember is the idea that we have to have someone believe in ourselves, or we have to have someone believe in us more than we believe in ourselves, because it helps us kind of see something in us that we can't see in ourselves.
Yep.
That's the kind of the angle that I tell so many people, is like this idea of who you hold yourself as is not who you actually are, but it's just your idea of yourself.
Right.
And so when you have someone outside of you that sees something in you that you can't see in you, well, you access a different version of yourself that can coexist with the version that you see of yourself,
Right.
which I
And
think
vice versa.
is
If
what
you
you
have
did.
somebody showing, like lifting up a mirror to you and saying, this
Yeah.
is who you are, and you don't identify with it, you're going, no, I'm not. And then that takes up so much energy and is demoralizing when somebody doesn't see who you really are.
Yeah. And so for you, you were a strategic advisor, you were in investment banking for a bit. You, for a long time, it was this idea of helping powerful men become more powerful. And now
Yeah.
you're in this phase of life where you want to
Right.
help.
And penance.
Right. But now it seems as though you're trying to help people earlier on in their journey so that this can be actually accessed to the world in general. When did that switch
Yes.
for you?
Okay. As my kids got older, and
Hmm.
so my kids have this saying, sometimes someone just needs to borrow your mom.
Mm.
And they will bring their friends over. Or my daughter doesn't live in the same state. She's, my oldest is out working, and she will, I'll get a text saying, this friend of mine just needs a mom for, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure. And what she actually means is not so much the mothering, but somebody's having a crisis, either with a romantic relationship, but more often these days for her, with a business situation. And they
Mm.
need somebody kind of to talk them through that has more perspective. And so as my kids got older, I started doing my therapy and realizing that maybe this idea of managing 40 to 50 to 60-year-old men's moods and being like the special girl that's chosen, that they
Right.
tell all their secrets, maybe that's not super healthy. So I'm
Yeah.
really effective. I'm really good at it. But most of my clients, I mean, if I'm going to be straight up honest, you don't see somebody at that level of power who's not pretty selfish. I mean,
Yeah.
they might be really interesting and they might have wonderful qualities, but almost by default, if they've climbed the ladder that tall, they're neglecting some pieces of their lives. They're
Mhm.
not home with their kids and tucking them into bed. It is very, very rare. And I started to feel like I was mortal. I mean, you've been through some life-changing events where you're like, I'm not going to live forever, because people don't.
Mhm.
And I went through some events too where I realized I can't die with this. I know things and I can do things at a level that nobody else on the planet can do.
Yeah.
And for a while I kept it secret because I was constantly requested to advance AI. And I felt like I didn't want to do it. I've lived in dictatorships. I didn't want to give that. There was no amount of money that could convince me to give what I knew to the AI. And as the AI started to develop, I thought, well, now I'm free. Now it doesn't matter if I teach the world what I can do. And so I felt really strongly about teaching young children how to recognize predatory behavior. So I have a children's book out. I also felt really strongly about people your age. As my children got to be a certain age and their friends would come over and they would say at the dinner table, or even when they'd walk in the door, Annie, can you teach me one thing? Teach me just one thing today. And so I started feeling like it was selfish not to give it away.
Yeah.
So I put it all over social media and I've taught these little clips, because micro expressions it's all fine and dandy to write books, and the books are great. They explore it, they describe it in depth. But if I just show you that that's the no face,
Mhm.
you see it a couple times and now you're like, wait a second, I can see it everywhere. It's happening all day long. And everybody that can move their face is showing these emotions in the same exact way. It's a biological response to, I don't like something. It actually is moving to, like, it's a tendency to try to shut off our sense of smell and to stop something from gaining access to our vulnerability, which is our physical self. And so we respond when we're feeling emotionally vulnerable too. I don't like that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. And again, I find like this work, it would be selfish if you left it in you
Yeah.
in you and you didn't give it out. Like
Well,
there's a
what if I
need
just
for it.
die and I take it with me? And then, I mean, I'm under no illusion that somebody won't come up with it, or that my kids couldn't do a certain degree of it. But right now, they're all at that age where they want to go their own path. I do have one that, like, she's just gonna, that's just, I can see it. She's so good at it. But the other ones just don't really want to. And I don't think they will. But so there was this piece of, I have courses online. My
Yeah.
courses, if you want them in a really structured way, they're expensive. So I've got one that's micro expressions, sort of basic, and then I have one that's love and dating, and that's coming out too. But it felt strongly about democratizing the ability to read micro expressions. If it's something that babies know, how ridiculous is it that we can't teach grown-ups? I mean, I do
Yeah.
know that our brains stagnate and grow and all of these different things in different ways, but surely if we could do this at 11 months, that it's got to be a teachable skill. And so that's what I kind of embarked on way back in the day in terms of teaching my own children. And I wanted it to be accessible. So I've made it so that if you put in the work and you look at my social media stuff, you can practice. And the way I would say to practice is to pick one expression, look at that little clip, I don't know, 14 days in a row, and no other clips, just that little. I mean, you can go through all of them, but when you really settle down to learn it as a skill, choose one at a time, get that expression solid, and then move on to the next one.
I want to get into some of the practical things, because
Mhm.
for you to drop your anonymity and step into this world of writing a book, writing
Yeah.
courses,
Oh, I
putting it
hated
out into
that.
the world, it's like,
It's
there are
awful.
some days where I love being on social media. I get to have a conversation with an amazing human. And then there's other days where I want to disappear entirely. So like
Yes.
I fully understand that. And
Yeah.
to have essentially like not be in that space and then to
Mhm.
jump into it now when you have all of this leverage and experience already, like there's no, other than helping the world, there's no reason for you to do it. Right. So I think it's
No.
valuable. Um,
No, other than money, other than this
of
piece of
course.
being a divorced woman who's got 3 kids in college, and realizing that I think the world in a way that it didn't feels dangerous for all of us. So
Yeah.
money is more important to me than it's ever. I've never been focused on money. And I think I've gotten a deeper respect as my children go out in the world. And I realize that the things they want to do and get educated on the level that they do, it's just incredibly expensive. So there is, I would be lying if I didn't say that was a piece of it. And one of my favorite, my best friend's a clinical psychologist, and one of the favorite things that we say to each other, which originally came from her, which is both can be true. You know, I can be like 10% or 15% doing it for the money, and then the majority is doing it just because it's the right thing to do. But both can be true. But for me, it's a way to stay safe in the world, and it's hard to take. It's a burden to see everybody's emotions, but it makes it almost impossible, makes it very, very hard to ignore red flags. And it puts words and science on your gut, the stuff that you know that you regret when you don't listen to your instincts or your gut. You regret 6 months down the line. You're like, oh, I knew this person was bad news, or I knew they were that they didn't care about my emotions or my feelings or my wallet or my promotion, or they were going to throw me under the bus. I knew it. And that's often some piece of disgust, which is the shadows right here that get deeper. And as soon as you learn to just, if your gut is saying there's something off, and you look and you're like, there's a shadow right there, that's disgust. So you see if I'm like totally, now I've done it so many times, but if I'm totally relaxed versus if I just lift it a little bit, you're looking for the change in that person's neutral face.
Yeah, and I love, that's one thing I love about psychology is it's not but it's and, right? Like it's and, right? And it can be and. It's okay for there to be two reasons.
It can be three things. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And you can feel multiple emotions. We get so stuck on wanting this black and white, and we say, well, this woman married that man because of the lifestyle. Well, I'm sure she likes the lifestyle, but does she also deeply love him? Was she madly in love with him and enjoys his sense of humor and but also, likes the lifestyle? I mean, I know one woman who just grew up very, very poor and never had enough of anything, including food. And I don't think the primary thing that she necessarily married her husband for was the money, but it certainly didn't hurt that he was incredibly competent. She found that very, very attractive.
I think too, it's important to change your mind, and it doesn't have to be about like if you don't change your mind, there's probably, like I don't want to be surrounded by people that are still in the same position, still thinking the same things, have the same beliefs, have the same habits 6 months ago, because it just shows that they're not open for growth. Like the absolutes would keep us in such a small way of thinking and being in this world. And that's why I love travel, because it's like you're surrounded by so much different that is you were forced to change in a way.
Well, the French have this expression. So I lived in Switzerland for 3 years. I mean, that's a whole another rabbit hole. Decided to move down to Switzerland to live with my salsa partner that I'd met in Salamanca, Spain. He was a Swiss undercover cop. I mean, it was a terrible idea from start to finish. He wasn't very nice to me. But we used to go up into the mountains on the weekend, and the thing they would always say was, changer les idées, that if you change your location, you change your ideas. Yes. And it's so interesting to me that it's one of the reasons I love travel too, especially as a mom of 3 kids, which, sometimes they're home, sometimes they're not these days because they're older. But this piece of there's always stuff to do when I'm at home. There's always laundry, there's cleaning. I have this big house that needs, repairs and fixing, and there's garbage to move to the curb and all of the things. When I change my environment and I change the conversations I'm having and the people I'm having conversations with, there's nothing more interesting to me than having a really good, real conversation with somebody who thinks a little differently than I do.
Absolutely. 1000%. When you cannot go without a conversation without noticing micro expressions. So I could assume that telling if someone's a liar or if there's a red flag or so many different things, it's very easy for you to point that out. So if whether it's a romantic relationship or you're trying to be a business partner, how can you tell if someone is lying to you?
So you're looking for the facial expression and the words need to match, just like the body language. So I never slept with that man. As somebody's nodding, that's going to be problematic.
Right.
That's really problematic. And we're seeing a lot of politicians going, I absolutely support this candidate. Oh my goodness, it's hysterical. You're going like, no, you don't. Like your body is betraying you. There was a clip where Hillary Clinton, she did this. It's on Apple, I believe. It's called Grit. And she was, I believe she's the executive producer. Like I'm kind of growling because I'm not sure. My body is not sure I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
And so she talks about why she stayed married and said, because I knew my husband was a good man. And I was like, holy hell, woman. Holy hell. Like, you do not believe
Are you
yourself.
sure?
Yeah. So I think that's one of the most basic things I teach. And that is ironically not universal. Almost everything I teach is the micro expressions are hardwired into us as a species, nothing to do with culture. There are cultures in the world that do different head movements. That is not always yes or always no, but it's sort of de facto so ingrained in our culture and in Western culture, Western Europe, North America, that we, if someone has grown up here and not in India or Sri Lanka, where there's different head movements that I know some of and not all of them. The other thing we look for is somebody, when you're telling the truth, it's like there's two things going on. Your body's telling a story and your words are telling a story. Those need to be aligned. Those should be the same thing, because our subconscious body doesn't know how to lie. So the only way we can get our subconscious, our micro expressions to lie is if we're so good at betraying our brain that we convince ourselves that something is true. So that could be a problem with a spy or somebody with extreme delusion, that they actually believe what they're telling is truth, even if it has no basis in reality. But for most people, and I believe it's one of the reasons that some spies actually go insane, because that cognitive disconnect of living two lies, and it's one of the reasons that it's so unhealthy for us to live sort of this second hidden life, where we're betraying people and where our body ends up responding as if we're betraying ourselves. So you're looking for, I like the food was awful. It was disgusting. I had to eat things. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That doesn't mess with our nervous system. But I really love doing this podcast with you. And I'm growling at you. See, like that, then I showed the crap face because that made my body so uncomfortable to put on the lie that I almost have to retreat and recover afterwards. So we're just such physical beings. I mean, I joke with my kids that, I have one kid who's deals with anxiety, and I send her to get a massage all the time because I say we're made of meat. And so, yes, talk therapy, great, especially when it's somebody that's really good. But there are times when you just need somebody to rub your muscles, just sort of like manually remove the stress out of our bodies. And we know that with little animals and with little children, that they need to be like stroked and scratched behind their ears and like snuggled and held in close, that does something for us on a physical level. So when a loved one is really stressed, if you're physically there, you can help them physically. And they're, depending on the relationship. I mean, I don't touch my clients other than I give them a big squeeze and a big hug. But I do tell them I have told some of these guys, you absolutely have to do a massage every week and just literally get the stress rubbed out of your body, because you're going to give yourself a heart attack.
Yeah, somatic work is something that I'm learning more about this year, and I've had a lot of conversations with somatic therapists and so many things like on the podcast, because talk therapy isn't everything, and for a
It's
lot of
not
people,
everything. It's one piece. Yeah.
and for a lot of people, it's even detrimental because they find themselves just talking about their problems and they're more consumed about their problems. And a lot of therapists want their clients to stay longer, and so they just continue to kind of keep that going. It's unfortunate that that's the path that it is, but that's why your work again is so impactful for the people that are at the highest level, because no matter who they're talking to, they have no one, but they can't lie to you, and that's so powerful.
They can't. And and every once in a while they try. And so the one of the best pieces of life, I think, is using humor. I mean, if you can make somebody, because humor is one of the biggest for me, and I think particularly people who have survived pain, which is really most of us humans. But if you've dealt with a significant amount of pain, you almost never meet a first responder or somebody who's been in the military for a long time that doesn't have a little bit of gallows humor, just
Hmm.
a little bit, because it's how we take the edge off. And if someone lies and you can poke fun at it, if you've got enough of a relationship, and the gift that microexpression has given me, or the ability to read microexpressions has given me, is that I can see when I've gone too far. And so I can correct and pull back and say something softer. So if I've really hurt somebody's ego because I pushed too hard, because part of my job is pushing and
Hmm.
questioning and saying, being the person that says, well, that's bullshit. That's just not a thing. And this is
Yeah.
not help. And also, you can't behave like that. You actually just humiliated one of your board members. That's not okay. It's disrespectful. It's mean, and it's not getting you anything except for like a dose of adrenaline that you think you feel good about yourself. And if I've gone too far, I can see the anger, or I can see the swallow of the vulnerability, and I'd say, look, I'm only telling you this because we're close and I'm trying to help you. Or I could say something to soften, and also, you're really good at this, so you don't need to do that.
Mhm.
And I can correct. And so the piece that people get stuck on sometimes is I get a lot of questions about, like, but how manipulative is this?
Yeah.
And there's a piece of it that can be extremely manipulative. What is fascinating to me is that there's so much empathy in my work that it's hard to get really good at micro expressions if you're a manipulative person, because you don't genuinely tend to care as much about the empathetic pieces. So you don't tend to put in the work to learn the language. I mean, in
Mm.
theory, it's possible. I've never met anybody who's extremely good at micro expressions on a really, really high level and can use them effectively to connect with people in sort of an icky way. It's just almost like it doesn't work, but I may be surprised, that doesn't mean it won't happen, that I won't meet somebody like that someday. That the guys that don't have any empathy or don't have an empathetic bone, they have a really hard time focusing it's a language, so you have to practice, and they have a hard time practicing because it's painful to actually see the real genuine responses. Part of being a narcissist or part of being a sociopath is not actually absorbing other people's true emotions.
Mhm.
It's objectifying them. And when you do a lot of micro expressions, it removes your ability to objectify humans.
Yeah. There's a test called a strengths finder. I did a strengths finder,
Okay.
and I empathy was really high on mine, but I know
Yeah.
people that I've worked with that their empathy was all the way at the bottom, and it made a hell of a lot of sense. And
Like,
so yeah, and so that is fully true. Like the amount of value that you can give is profound. Like we didn't even jump into so many practical ways of talking
Mhm.
about this, but we're over time, and I would love to have you on again in the future.
Sure. I'd love that. Yeah.
Um, there's one last question I ask every
Sure.
guest, and my question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
So I thought about that because I watched your podcast and I was like, I know I'm going to get this question. I think, and I have a lot of answers because there's a lot
Oh
of
yeah,
things, and I'll bet you and I both, right? We're sort of
yes.
constantly questioning and thinking, well, how could I learn this? And this serves me, doesn't serve me. I think one of the things that I have historically and still struggle with, and I talk with my loved ones, and some of my clients are my loved ones that I've worked with for a really, really long time, is that I have had to unlearn this idea that if people love me or care about my well-being, they will intuitively protect me, take care of me, and provide for me.
Mhm.
So it's really learning in both love and business and friendships and all the pieces to ask very specifically for what I want, to not expect somebody to be able to fill my needs. And I've always thought I'm such a good communicator, and am
Yeah.
so specific. And yet for me, specifically asking to get paid for certain things because my work overlaps so much, and because my clients have this deep friendship with me, that asking them to pay fair rates for what I do, especially considering some of them are so extremely wealthy, but some
Hmm.
wealthy people have a really hard time sharing. And so I've learned to ask very cheerfully and very specifically for what I want, both when it comes to love, attention, and money. I mean, I had somebody that I work with that was just sort of had such a deep relationship with me that he had a hard time. He would cancel on me sometimes. And I got to the point where I just very specifically said, look, this work is really important and the friendship is really important. And I haven't seen you in X amount of time. And that doesn't work for me. I'm asking you to prioritize it moving forward. And he, canceled the meeting within 3 days and was like, we're going to sit down. And we were doing the calls. I just needed this. It's such a deep relationship and it's such a reciprocal relationship. Yeah.
Good. No,
And,
I think
he was like, okay, but it was just such a hard ask.
yeah. I think asking in general is hard for a lot of people. Like just for what we want and whatever it is, everyone is, I think, to some respect, in some way, is unlearning the fact that people are just supposed to know how we feel just because we feel it.
And the best example, which you could see me covering my mouth because I'm like, I'm going to say something inappropriate, is that I came of age in Sweden. And in Sweden, anybody who has sex with anybody else learns, I'm exaggerating, there's going to be Swedes that are like, no, that's not true. But people are taught about sex and about sexual gratification and how to pleasure each other in school.
Wow.
And so that's completely different than growing up in the US. So I've done like sort of most of my up until the age of 16 in the US. And then where there's, at least in my generation in the 80s, there's so much shame for both genders, or, for anybody, any human.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Sweden. And so the biggest thing that I find with people who have happy sex lives are that they communicate. They actually use words. And there is this idea that that people should know intuitively. And that's the dumbest example of like thinking somebody should know what you feel. And actually a female body, how sensitive to pain and pleasure it is, varies from day to day. So if she is not saying softer, harder, gentle, like more of this, less of this, if she's not using her words, it's not as good as it could be. So this ability of accepting the fact that we need to tell people what we like, not just not just one time, but even in that moment, what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And that changes the dynamic and the intimacy and the pleasure for everybody. So I try to tell my kids that. They're like, oh, no, don't want to hear this.
It's the things that are uncomfortable we want to avoid, but it's those exact things that if we actually approach them, it's like confrontation is the catalyst to growth in whatever area it is. And most of the time, go ahead.
Oh, so my ex-husband has this really lovely ex-girlfriend. So I always joke that he has really good taste in women, which he does, But she, they dated when they were very young. And this woman used to always say to me, we had babies at the same time. So whenever I was in his hometown visiting his parents, which I often did by myself because he was working at the time and I was on maternity leave, I would spend time with his ex-girlfriend from his teenage years. And she used to always say, det är konflikterna som vi lär känna varandra, which means it's in the conflict that we learn to know each other. And I just think that's so beautiful. This idea of, it's painful, but that's when we really get to the juicy bits of humanity and ourselves and other people.
Yeah, I heard a quote recently from a book, Awareness by Anthony DeMello, which is like from like 1980 or something, that most people don't want a cure. What they want is relief. Because a cure implies that there's going to be more pain endured. And so the cure is actually having the conversation. The cure is actually talking about what you want. It's not, beating around the bush and just expecting someone to know. And that's what most of us go through our life doing. And that's why, again, micro expressions, being able to communicate and have conversations that are not easy to have is one of the most valuable skill that you can have, because, relationships are the most valuable thing in the world, in my opinion. Annie, again, this was so amazing. I cannot wait to have you again. Yes, like you're so easy to talk to, so much value to provide. All of your links, of course, will be in the show notes, but is there anywhere or anything that you'd like to direct people to?
Yeah, if you just Google me, you can come to my website. It's anniesarnblad.com. I've got my books and my courses, but for people who just don't want to spend even $1, go to TikTok, go to Instagram. On my website too, I have some of the short video clips in the expressions library. There's a lot of stuff you can just get for free, because it really does matter to me that this is an accessible skill for people to learn.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.